Morning all, the World Championship candidates is underway. Round 1 was played yesterday. Let's have a look at the big clash between Magnus Carlsen, the highest rated player in the world, and Levon Aronian. Magnus playing black. D4 from Levon. In previous head-to-head stats, Magnus leads 7-4 in terms of victories before this game, with 21 draws. So it's one of Magnus's most fierce rivals, and he's playing with the black pieces. Knight f6. After c4 we see e6, and now Queen's Indian territory, and in particular I think this is the Bogo Indian, after the person I have great difficulty in pronouncing, Bogolojabov. So Bogo Indian territory here. After bishop d2, the dark square bishops get exchanged. The queen slightly a tempo gaining target here. Not entirely ideal on d2. Black plays now d5, knight c3, black castles, e3, queen e7, rook c1. It looks a little bit like a standard just queen's gambit declined now, with the absence of the dark square bishops. Rook d8. Queen looks maybe slightly disturbed by that rook there. Queen c2. Okay, the queen's better placed here. A battery can be done on h7 if needed. Pressure on the c file with cd potentially. a6. And now a3, which is an interesting move. Potentially bishop after taking could potentially drop back now on a2 on a b5. Black doesn't take on c4 here. Black actually plays knight bd7. We see bishop e2, and now this taking on c4, waiting for that bishop to waste time a little bit more. So bishop takes c4 now. c5. So black has that 3-2 pawn majority in this position, and it may be desirable to play b5 pretty soon, just to give the bishop on bishop b7 square. So bishop e2, b5 anyway, even if it's not kicking the bishop. This b7 square is useful. We're heading now for a symmetrical pawn structure after d takes c5. So absolutely identical pawn structure on both sides here. Queen takes c5. Doesn't run into any problems. Queen takes c5, which knight takes c5 may do, like knight takes b5 on that c5 knight. So queen takes c5 is played. b4, and now we really have a symmetrically placed pawn structure on both sides. Queen e7. After castling, bishop b7. Black looks to be without too many issues. The only slight concern is there's a little bit of pressure on the queen side structure, more than there is on white's structure. Both sides have a potentially weak square on white for c4 and black for c5, but it's not a problem really at the moment. a4, this is the more critical thing for black to address, but it is giving up the b pawn to try and intensify that queenside pressure, or just force all the pawns to come off on the queen side, really. So queen b1, if that pawn on b5 is coming off again, doesn't look to be the most exciting game of chess ever played in the history of mankind here after bishop takes f3. But this is an interesting point where bishop takes f3 does actually technically create an imbalance in the position, something different now for both sides. Black's given up that light square bishop, and usually, you know, the dark squares or d2, these dark squares are more exploitable, often giving up the light square bishop. If you give up a dark square bishop, usually it's the light square. So rook ab8, but here there's no real issues for both sides, it would seem. Knight e5, although d2, there is access to d2, okay, but this is shut off now with knight d4, and we reach now after knight takes f3, the imbalances have been removed, so both sides have exactly the same stuff, and now start mimicking each other like maybe two people would on a hot date, a first hot date, mimicking each other's movements. Okay, so rook d7, rook b2, rook c7, knight d4, knight d5, and we're going to see handshakes now. Okay, it wasn't the most exciting game ever, but for Magnus to draw with black against one of his most feared rivals, I suspect, in this tournament, is a good thing. He can push for more with the white pieces. Because this game is so dry, I'm not really sure I'm going to do a technical analysis, and in fact, let's have a look at the other games as well. Let's do a round by round coverage actually. So I'm going to close this now. Well, we'll do a quick overview and summary without any technical analysis. So basically Magnus has used a kind of transposition into a kind of safe Queen's Gambit declined, where he had very few issues. He's playing this classical plan of just sorting out his bad piece. The one bad piece black has is the c8 bishop usually. So with this a6 he's working on the b5 and bishop b7 plan, which is now in place, but we have queen takes c5 just for safety, no tactics there for white. So both sides have that symmetrical structure on the queen side. White a4, okay, might encourage one to wake up here on a4 because it is giving up the b4 pawn, but just to get it back, that b5 pawn, what else can black do? Well, this was neat the way it just simplified quite easily off the bishop takes f3 here. So knight takes b5, knight e5, it's just calm simplification, no imbalances at all to work with. So without imbalances it's very difficult often for a side to win. Okay, so let's go on to another game of the round. So Gelfand against Radjabov. Okay, Boris playing white. We saw d4. Now bishop b4 check. Knight d2, okay. Black castling. So bishop e7 from Radjabov, inviting white to have an interesting centre here with e4. Okay, bishop e2. b4, preparing bishop b2. It looks impressive, white's pawns for the moment. Okay, bishop b2. And I haven't got a clue actually about this position, so I'm just going to play it through quickly and I'll come back. 1 second. Okay, I'm just getting a gist. This looks like another mega dull, boring game. So everyone doesn't want to take too many risks in this first round. So, pardon me. So yeah, they're not taking too many risks. So white is, although visually, for the moment, has got an impressive array of pawns here. Black's got the e5 square to work with, and exchange of rooks here. Now there's d5. Okay. Exposes b4 as a target, liberates the bishop on f8. Okay, and we have a symmetrical pawn structure again. How wonderful for both sides. okay, G3, conceding a bit of weakness, but Fincher to the bishop. Black doesn't want to play C5, I guess, here because of knight B5. So Black's got a slight issue to deal with. Again, there's B7 bishop. But now we have this polite simplification. Everyone respects each other, and C5 is played just to get rid of that bad bishop, potentially. Simplification here, and handshakes pretty soon. Okay. Yeah, first round is not a spectator sport at the moment. So that was Boris Gelfand versus Radjabov, Teimour Radjabov, who's often playing actually the King's Indian defence. Hopefully, maybe there's some bloodthirsty King's Indians from him later in the tournament, unless he's given that up. So let's go on to Svidler against Kramnik, and I think this was the game of the round, actually. So don't fall asleep yet. So D4, and Vladimir played, it's Queen's Gambit to climb over the difference. Knight takes D5 here, and in post-game commentary actually Svidler would have been surprised with E takes, so he was expecting, I think, half expecting Knight takes D5. So what's the problem here, you might think, for Black to play this? Well, he's got less defence around his king if he castles kingside routinely, but he's aiming for a quick bishop b4 check after CD. White stops that with a3. Okay, but here after CD, there's a very energetic move which Vladimir played, e5, trying to provoke weaknesses from White on the dark squares. So d5 I think would be a strategic blunder. Bishop c5, it looks very comfortable, for example. So here we see knight f3, and the queens come off. Okay, bishop e3, and White has a slight pull here. It's not as dull as you might think. Knight b6, after the game, Vladimir's talking about how he's having to play very, very accurately after this move. It's to make this position work, otherwise, because White's potentially threatening a quick infiltration into c7 here. Even if a3 drops, that can be really dangerous, and there's also things like knight b5 for this knight and that pawn to be vulnerable. But bishop d7, an accurate move, it would seem to stop any knight b5s. Knight f5. The king is a slight target potentially, though, in the centre. You might think it's useful for the endgame, but rook fd8 was given by Svidler as a very accurate move in circumstance, because White was threatening things like knight d6, but I think this handles things potentially quite well. Well, for example, bishop g4 check, the king kind of exposed. Rook hc1, and I think Peter kind of expressed some regret that he couldn't really play for a win. His position really, I don't think, justified it. And here they have, a repetition. Okay, so I know these are very, very dry, dull games. They're not going to make the brilliancy games of all time, but this is a really, really important tournament, and the agenda of the players is to get into the tournament, get on the scoreboard, and just they're showing great respect for each other at the moment. It's not to create entertaining games for us spectators, especially on YouTube. So okay, so far we've seen pretty dry games, and let's look at the fourth. So I thought I'm making it this video more exciting than usual by putting all four games together. I couldn't really bear the thought of doing each game individually. Now, so Ivanchuk against Grischuk. Okay, so the two Chuckies are playing each other. So they both share that Chuck in their name, Ivanchuk, Grischuk. Okay, interesting. So knight f3 from Vasily, d5, d4, and this is kind of Catalan territory now after g3, offering that c4 pawn. It's not taken. Now it's taken. White's regaining now with queen c2. Is that tempo gainer? of great significance? Well, it does help black solve that dreaded c8 bishop problem. So we have here the c8 bishop problem being resolved. Okay, bishop slightly, well, black still has some other problems. Now bishop takes f6, so if you think about the light square complex, this usually helps white generate some pressure on light squares, a bishop exchange like this for a knight. But here there's another factor, this c5. Black maybe wants to play c5, but it's going to be inhibited by white now. White's playing for this knight b3 to clamp down on c5. So he has a slight pull here, and maybe knight a5 will be a nuisance. But bishop e4, okay, now knight d5, so tempo gaining on the queen. And now c5 here, so black looks as though he shouldn't have too many problems. We've got that dreaded, from a spectator's point of view, symmetrical pawn structure on both sides again. Okay, a couple of rooks coming off. Bishop f1, excitingly offering the opportunity for doubling white pawns, which is taken here, so we have an imbalance to celebrate. So rook c8. Imbalance is popularized by Silman, like differences in the position which the sides try and exploit, these potentially favorable differences they work on and negate the opponents. So here, okay, we have some damage to the structure, but white has this bishop to compensate. So h4, h5, bishop d3, and it looks as though there's a nasty pin on the cards here. But with the exchange of rooks, it's not a big deal. That's moved. The queen moves away anyway. g6. Okay, bishop e4. Queen f6, keeping an eye on b2. Okay, f4 now. The knight's got that c4 square for a moment. It's sealed off. Knight d5. King g2. Queen a1. Is white under a little bit of pressure, you might think? Well, he's giving up a pawn here to get an a3 pawn. And it looks a bit drawish. Okay, a few checks. Okay, queen c6. f5, dissolving the pawns dramatically. Okay, and now after this, f takes to protect the pawn. Yeah, it was actually protected there. So we have a situation here, equal on pawns, and now this is actually drawn because both sides' pawns lock down the king in this position. After a3, they actually agreed a draw. If we continue, for example, king c2, we can have this situation where neither side are making progress. So that's it. just go here, draw. So okay, not the most exciting round in the history of chess, but I thought, for the record, if you wanted to see the games, this video might be useful in some way. Okay, so everyone's on the scoreboard now. Let's hope for some bloodthirsty games in the next few days. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.